the odds are that it's going to be a woman.
Yep.
And 50 to 60% the odds are that it's going to be a minority woman, because that way you get a twofer. You agree?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be shocked if it wasn't a woman, and I think that's great. Actually, there's, I think there's room on that court for another woman probably, and I think if he could get a minority of some sort, that would be probably a positive thing for him. But the thing I think you can bank on is that it'll be a woman.
Either way, if he chooses someone, we know a woman, minority, regardless of how liberal that person, doesn't really change the vote of the courts.
Yeah, it's not. We would need a conservative to retire in order for there to be any kind of change in the court, because it's basically going to be somebody who's going to just essentially vote the same way that Souter's been voting.
At the same time, Phil Musser, you can't really appoint somebody or nominate somebody who's too liberal, right? Because then you're talking about this ideological shift. So you have to be very careful about who it is you appoint.
Well, I think that's right. That's the challenge for Obama. I mean, I think the question is they have to make the political calculus about how far left they want to go. Making the argument for how far left they probably will go, I think, is that they've got an enormous amount of political capital. It's early in the term. This is something that essentially could placate the very vocal left wing of their party, which frankly has been somewhat disenchanted with Obama on some issues through the first 100 days. So the question that both Republicans and Democrats will be watching very carefully is exactly how left on the leftometer is this pick, and it's going to be the most fascinating debate, because it will calibrate response from the Republicans as well as what kind of potential payback to the very left wing of the Democratic Party it might.
I want to throw some names up for you now. We've got some full screens. If we can put these up now. One of the first names that came up was, on the top left, is Sonia Sotomayor. She is a Hispanic woman, 16 years of court experience. Then you have Elena Kagan next to her. Elena Kagan, by the way, is the Solicitor General, which is the person who represents the White House at the Supreme Court. Diane Wood is another one. Diane Wood wrote a dissent against bans on partial birth abortions in Illinois and Washington. And Cass Sunstein was recently nominated to head the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. And the question here, Kirsten, is that you go back to Justice Alito and John Roberts, and the Democrats pilloried them. And the question is, how tough are Republicans on whomever the president decides to nominate?
Well, if we're going to judge them based on the last 100 days, I would say they're probably going to make a lot of noise. And they haven't been too quick to get on board with anything Obama's doing, and I don't think there's any reason to think that they're going to start now.
Yeah, Phil, do you agree with that? I mean, do you think that this is going to be a battle come Senate time? And where does Arlen Specter play into this?
It's a great question. Arlen Specter obviously be a very important and pivotal vote. Arlen Specter has played a historic role in the nomination of Supreme Court justices, frankly, as has Joe Biden. But, it remains to be seen yet, I think, what Republican reaction will be until you have a nominee. But clearly, if you put someone up on the court who's got an openly hostile agenda to many of the key components of the Republican coalition, I think that, Kristen knows this too, there's a cottage industry that explodes every time there's a Supreme Court nomination in Washington, and depending on how far left the pick is and on issues of values and choice and life and things like that, I think you're going to see certain constituencies get very motivated and very agitated. And obviously with that 59th and 60th vote still undetermined in Minnesota, there's a lot of things to consider.
But you look at the headline right under you, Phil, and it says Souter appointed in 1990 by President George H.W. Bush. And I'm not sure that President George H.W. Bush knew what he was getting. I mean, look, he was appointing someone, and many have said that was a big mistake, Kirsten, because you look at his voting record, and this is from the University of Chicago study, David Souter's conservative voting record, 37.4% versus Clarence Thomas, 82.2%. That is not what you were looking for.
Yeah, well, it's also the danger of appointing somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience. He hadn't been on the bench very long. I mean, the same could be said of Clarence Thomas, and Clarence Thomas ended up being an extremely reliable conservative vote. So, you do take a little bit of a risk when you do it. But look, the first George Bush wasn't the most conservative person either. So I doubt he wanted it to go this way, but I'm not sure that he didn't have a sense of who he was.
Phil Musser, is it a cautionary tale? Go ahead. Is it a cautionary tale for President Obama and who he chooses?
Absolutely, it's a cautionary tale. I think if you asked President Bush 41, probably his biggest legacy disappointment, I think he'd probably point to David Souter and his track record on the court. I mean, the other thing that's kind of inside baseball here is that actually confirming a Supreme Court nominee at the White House, while President Obama is dealing with so many large and complicated issues, consumes an enormous amount of time, energy, and focus. And so, frankly, this relatively unexpected announcement and the prospect that potentially 3 Supreme Court appointments could happen in the first term of the Obama presidency really will tax their ability to figure out how much time and energy this takes versus the next pieces in healthcare and energy. And so that's one of the big friction points that people should watch as they see this debate unfold.
We got to go, and you say 3, and he's talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg could be one of them. She is battling cancer right now. John Paul Stevens is 89 years old, so there could be 3. He could shape this court, Kristen, 10 seconds.
And I think they've been planning for this. I think that they knew this was coming, and I think they are actually ready for it.
Anybody handicapping? Anybody throwing names out at all? Phil, I got to go. But
I'll let Kristen do that.
All right, Kirsten
Come on, Powers.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Julie?
All right, thanks.
All right, we'll